Cool.
All right. Well, we'll kick things off today. Arturo is now on parental leave, so I'll be continuing on as facilitator. Let me share my screen. And I know we had a bit of an issue with the meeting link. So if everyone comes to view the video after the fact, we should have an updated meeting link now. We'll make sure that's working moving forward. What I wanted to cover first today is I wanted to go over the results from our API user survey. I shared this in our working group chat or channel in Slack, and really just wanted to have more of a discussion versus just presenting. So what I want to do is just kind of go through some of the takeaway slides, and then we can go from there. I can drill down into any particular slide or question that was asked, and we can have some more discussion there. So the first finding from the survey is I think that we're doing a really great job overall, where GitLab as a whole has been doing a great job with their APIs. Everyone has been ranking us really well in each of the categories that we asked for a 1 to 10 rating on. And generally we were seeing about 7 out of 10 across the board. And many are finding that our APIs are better than a lot of the other APIs that they're using in the industry. So I think that's great to acknowledge that. I know there are areas where we can continue to improve, but I wanted to make sure that we share that up front. The next kind of theme that I'm seeing in the responses is something I think we talked about. I think we talked about all these things in the first meeting we had. I was just kind of going back over that meeting ahead of this one. And feature parity or feature completeness is a top theme. I mean, being able to, as a customer or API user, be able to use any of the features that we're exposing through the product as an API is definitely critical to them. We have a lot of different personas, a lot of different types of users, not only internal, but we have customers, we have third-party maintainers, and we have tech partners who are building integrations. So if we don't expose those features, it slows them down and causes a lot of, I think, frustration. So I think that more than anything, I think that should be considered as a priority in whatever decisions we're making moving forward. The next theme is, I think, around automated documentation and tooling. Our users want to have a single source of truth to, for one, know what APIs are available, but also they want to be able to automate workflows around our documentation. We've had some customers who have looked at how they might be able to parse our documentation to pull out the actual endpoints and do things a bit more dynamically that way. The most heavily, I guess, used tool that users are leveraging when working with their APIs is CLI tools, and SDKs are the top two. So I think anything that we do, we need to keep those tools in mind, keep SDKs and libraries in mind, and if SDKs and libraries are not, if they're lagging behind dramatically, then that's going to impact our users as well. And I know that we've had some users express concerns around, for example, using GraphQL through CLI and some of the usability concerns there. I think another kind of low-hanging fruit item that continues to come up, and we can look at some of the charts and data that I have, but this seemed to be one of the more common responses in text form. Like outside of the data, everyone's asking for an open API spec that's up to date. And I think that's something that's really low-hanging fruit and will help them to automate using our docs. And my last key finding slide is that REST continues to dominate. I'll show a chart here in just a second for this one, but that the general sentiment has been, pick an API and stick to it. However, REST is just has seemed to be more common for those at least that responded to the survey. And the sentiment I'm getting is that if we were to choose GraphQL first, we absolutely can't abandon REST. I think it's still heavily used. So one way I kind of looked at this is by stacking up the data for those who preferred REST or had no preference versus those who prefer GraphQL, and added up the no preference column. And so my takeaway is that 95% of the users who responded to the survey would be happy if REST was feature complete, essentially, if it was prioritized, while 42% would be happy if GraphQL was prioritized. And I will share the slide real quick on this one, and we can go into any of these deeper. But when I was first looking at the data, this is what I shared. I think we had like 250 responses early on the left, and it seemed to be pretty split between preferring REST and no preference. And then as I clean the data up, I can talk about the methodology and some of the decisions I made there. But as I started to kind of remove and filter out some of the data that didn't seem as trustworthy, this is the data that kind of surfaces that we had a larger percentage who prefer REST and a much smaller percentage who prefer GraphQL. But it is still interesting. There is there are quite a few people who don't have a preference in both interpretations, I guess, of this data. Okay, and the last two slides I wanted to touch on before we open it up for discussion. What I'm seeing as next steps based on this data is I'm going to continue having more individual conversations, direct interview conversations with top customers and users of our APIs. I want to share findings from that. I've also started a gap analysis, which I've shared somewhat internally to our team, but I want to share this to the working group and see if other teams can start contributing to our gap analysis. And I think with that data, we can really define a path forward for more API first and our REST versus GraphQL strategy. What I'd like to continue to do from there is also prioritize and identify what issues we want to work on first. But I think there are some things that we can continue to work on in the meantime that are low-hanging fruit that we know we want to start on. So a couple of those are the stories we have or issues we have around automating documentation and tooling, working on the open API spec. And I think we could start doing some experimentation around how we might deliver a REST wrapper for our GraphQL endpoints, or if there are other ways to look at that to automate delivering both REST and GraphQL APIs. And one thing I want to start doing is sharing more broadly ways that all the teams can contribute, even outside of our working group. So, if there are issues that we can start sharing outside for teams to start prioritizing, I'd like to do that. I'd like to share out the gap analysis as well. And then start thinking about like a labeling strategy. Are there opportunities to use labels to start surfacing up issues? I think that labels may not be used every time we're touching APIs. So it could help to start to see, what effort has been involved in like ongoing work with our APIs, and making sure that we can, kind of do some analysis and better prioritize based on labels. All right. Well, from there, I'll open it up to some discussion. And if you want me to share more on any particular slide, I can do that as well.
Well, first of all, thanks, Grant, for presenting that. That's very helpful. So do you have a particular recommendation about how to manage prioritization of effort here that you would think is, if it was your call, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the items that I mentioned on this slide are where I feel like we can start. There's low-hanging fruit there. I think we definitely need to get a better understanding of where our major gaps are. If we wanted to look at this as like feature parity, where are we where do we have features in the GitLab product that aren't exposed at all in an API, and where do we have endpoints exposed in REST versus GraphQL? I think we can make some decisions based on that. We can start to see which features are most highly requested, which ones are causing the most pain points, and start to close up gaps. I think long term, I guess where I expect to see this going is, I think we've learned from this that we can't do away with REST, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like it would be very palatable in GitLab to completely go REST first, and it might be a challenge technically to go REST first. So I think that we need to find a way and experiment with how we can support REST on top of GraphQL. How can we automate our tooling and actually get serious about that? So that may at least give us a direction to start moving forward. Maybe this means GraphQL is first, and if you want to be a modern application and have the latest and greatest as quick, we recommend customers to use that. But maybe we can have REST supported in some kind of policy, like 1 or 2 milestones after it's exposed in GraphQL, or however we want to define policy around that.
I suppose it also depends on how custom and handcrafted we wanted each endpoint to be. So I could easily imagine a REST wrapper over GraphQL that was able to automatically generate endpoints. They wouldn't be the prettiest endpoints in the world, but it wouldn't be aesthetically very pleasant. But I'm pretty sure you could create a URI to basically do any field down a path through the GraphQL query tree, and just create query parameters for each argument you needed. I can imagine that working. I mean, it would be, it might be, it ended up being somewhat ugly, but I think it would be functional. You might, and we could expose that through a different endpoint perhaps than our API v4, API v5 potentially.
Right.
So I think that's definitely a good idea that could be explored, that would automatically close any GraphQL REST gaps, because people would then get a call, something like that. Whether that's what people want to do, I don't know, but it would certainly be plausible.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems iterative. It seems like we could expose a feature in REST that doesn't exist there today and get feedback. And I think that's definitely aligned with our culture. And I think it would be a step forward. So, if there's a way to define that and issue, get some more feedback from the rest of the team. I know we have a pretty lightweight team on the call today, so I definitely want to extend the discussion in the next call. But I think seems like a really logical starting point.
Oh yeah, the other thing is you mentioned at the beginning talking about CLI tools. So I know we've recently released our own officially supported CLI tool. Have you seen any pickup in that and usage? And did any of the customers mention that they're aware of it?
No customers mentioned that specifically. Yeah, that's a good question. Where's that slide? So this is the slide, and it helps probably to go through each of these slides. I just didn't want to take up the entire meeting time presenting. But I think one thing I noted on this is that it's not like there was any set of tools here that was just minimal, like that was like much lower than the others, but CLI stood out, SDK stood out as the top used tools. Yeah, no one really individually in the comments mentioned using the GitLab CLI. Yeah, that's something I can definitely be following up on in like more contextual interview calls.
Cool. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing this. Talking about the SDKs, I'm wondering if there was more precise feedback on that. Like, did people say they were mostly up to date, or I think you mentioned that some of them were a little bit behind, and is that an issue, or something we should look into more?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the feedback was pointing to that users would really like to see GitLab owning and maintaining some SDKs in an official capacity. I think we've definitely heard that feedback, and I saw too that I missed a comment from Victor in our channel on this topic. One thing I did want to note is I feel that we've got a lot of foundational work that we could do first before we start trying to also maintain SDKs. I know that if that was to be something supported by the integrations team, we're already spread pretty thin. So I think we'd have to think about how we structure support for an SDK. Yeah, I mean, I have spoken to a number of maintainers, and the feedback is that they're really interested in seeing where we're headed with GraphQL versus REST. That impacts their strategy for maintaining the SDKs and libraries. There are cases where our APIs are lacking, where feature parity is lacking, in that then they get requests from users of the SDK, and they have to pass that, just be a pass through to us to say we need this endpoint exposed so that we can add it. And for some that are depending highly on REST, and that means that if it's not there, then they can't expose that feature, and they're getting a lot of requests coming through to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I was wondering if it would make sense for us to own those SDKs, but yeah, I guess that would be a lot of work on top. And yeah, it makes sense to do the other steps, foundational work first. Yeah, but maybe we can find some things we can support them more, like have like kind of a more direct channel they can ask questions, or I don't know, or I would guess it would be hard for them to keep the SDKs up to date because they don't get a notification when the API has a new endpoint or something. Yeah, maybe there can be some direct channels, but yeah, I see this would be a step that we would take when we figured out the other things.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and I'm absolutely not closed off to the idea. I think we need to ask more questions around what's involved, how we would support that, and or support one or many SDKs. Like, what does that look like? But I like the idea of incrementally just trying to provide better pathways, better channels. I also think that if we are closing up gaps in terms of feature parity and automating our tools and our documentation, that'll make their lives easier immediately. And if we wanted to continue on to try supporting some of these SDKs, then that's going to make our lives easier as well.
I think with all things, well, we have to be very cautious about just about wanting to maintain SDKs because you end up with having multiple SDKs and not multiple languages, multiple bindings you need to maintain. Focusing, I'm glad you mentioned the Open API specification, because that's definitely a path towards a single source of truth from which multiple SDKs can build out API bindings. That's a better use of our time than trying to make individual contributions to the Golang SDK and the Node one and the Ruby one and so forth.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of it becomes quite expansive once we open that door. Yeah. And it could be that we start with just one SDK as a primary at some point in time. But yeah, I think that I will admit I don't know how much is involved to support an SDK at this point. I'd want to do some research and try to get a better understanding of that and how we would also resource to support it. So I think it would definitely be a lot of additional effort on our end.
I can see there's probably some logic in supporting and probably also dogfooding a Golang SDK, especially with our own tools. And some bits of that are hard to automatically generate. You need to sort of do lots of code generation. So stuff like enums and things. So anything like a type language, that will be a little bit harder. So that's probably, if we did focus on any of them, I'm sure that's probably where our focus would go first, which makes a bit of sense, but we'd need to validate these assumptions.
Yeah, no, I get the same sense, but I think we can get a more objective analysis of that. And I also like the idea of incrementally moving that direction. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, but if I wonder, how much are we contributing today to the Go SDK, for example? Maybe that's something we could just start doing more of, and that we can get some empathy as well by seeing what some of the gaps are, and whether we're sole maintainers or official maintainers, we can still be maybe coming up with a way to contribute more and get more of a sense of the challenges.
One idea here might be, for example, that if we have like one SDK, one or two that we want to encourage, like Golang, for example,
right,
we could include stuff in our merge request templates that suggest if you have changed the response schema, or you've added a new field, or added an endpoint, have you considered notifying the maintainer? Have you considered making a merge request down that, or a pull request in this particular case,
right,
for downstream for the SDK, so that those things are kept up to date as new features are added in? So we could actually encourage that more explicitly in our development process.
Yeah, it seems to align as well with what Andy you were sharing earlier. Cool. Well, I know we've got 2 minutes left. Maybe I'll just, for our other items here, just wanted to remind everyone to share some status updates. I know we've got a number of open issues in our boards, and I know like they're working through various stages. So I see that there's work being done. That's awesome. Maybe we could kind of share an update if there are any blockers or anything, any challenges that we need to help move things forward. We can surface those up and communicate async. Yep. Any other final thoughts? All right. With that, we can end today, and let's continue this discussion a little bit more in the next meeting. I'll make sure that everyone is aware of these slides and has a chance to go through them, and we'll have one more discussion on this next time. But yeah, thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.